We spoke about education, we spoke about development. You'll have time for questions in the end. Let's now hear about public institutions, the policy and the governance side of it.
I'm Vishnupad. I'll be talking to you about the School of Policy and Governance and the kinds of programs we have, or what do we call them? Programs, right? So we are into our second batch of what we know as MPG, Masters in Public Policy and Governance. I'm assuming that there are no law students, right? Or no law, so I'm just not going to talk about that. Now, largely, Nilotpal and Rajashri, I mean, especially Rajashri has covered the sort of larger framework within which the university operates, its philosophical orientation, and the ways in which it is invested in something very particular, which is about social commitment, change, producing actors who could be part of that change, right? I mean, so that's the larger philosophy which informs our school. APU as a whole, but also each one of these schools within APU, right? So I'm not going to stress on that, not in some ways get into that conversation. Now, School of Policy and Governance, which houses the Masters in Public Policy and Governance program, it is a very particular kind of program, okay? I don't know how many of you here are interested in the MPG program, but whoever gets into the public policy program, obviously surveys various kinds of courses and programs and so forth all across India, if not outside. One of the things you notice is the very particular way in which these programs are framed, oriented, et cetera, right? The specific orientation of these courses is very technocratic, all right? As Nilotpal was stressing, when you do development at APU, it's not development studies, it's not about rural management, et cetera. Those are very particular kinds of courses, right? Our orientation, on the other hand, is of a different kind, okay? Our approach to public policy and governance, in some ways, is very much informed by social science orientation and humanistic orientation, okay? That's absolutely crucial to what we do, okay? Now, the reason why I want to stress on that, not only because of the ways in which these public policy and governance programs are talked about all across India, but there is a way in which, when we're trying to look at public policy and practices of governance and those sorts of things, we're interested in looking at them as issues and processes which are socio-culturally embedded. Okay, and so what that requires of us, both as faculty, both as students, but also as a program at large, in some ways is that you try and figure that out. Okay, now what that means is that it takes you to what, again, Nilotpal is emphasizing, Rajashri as well, which is certain interdisciplinary orientation, right? So in this program, for instance, we have courses on economics, but not pure economics, all right? Economics, again, understood in a very particular manner, right? We have courses on socio-cultural, practices of governance. So we have, something that I teach is called Everyday State in India, all right? Now, when the moment I say everyday state, it means something particular. It means that, everyday state is different from our imagination of what a modern Indian state looks like, or what the Constitution says, et cetera. How does it really operate on the ground? Why do we keep saying that public policies, are implemented in very specific ways, are formulated, et cetera, at the higher levels in very particular ways, and when it actually begins to operate, it all falls apart, right? Why does that happen, right? What is it so absolutely intrinsic to all these other processes which are quite central in the ways in which we experience the state itself, right? There are all kinds of issues that we look at, the idea of corruption, right? Say, for instance, I don't know how you look at corruption, right? Is it absolutely essential? Is it absolutely innate, intrinsic part of what we are, in India? Or let's say, how do you think about something like jugaad? What exactly is jugaad, right? Is it corruption? What does it involve? So in some ways, the point here is that you're looking at how does a state really operate on the ground, okay? And that orientation in some ways informs all our courses, all the core courses, all the foundational courses, all the elective courses we have there. Now, what that presupposes then is that you don't simply have a mastery over, say, economics or political science or sociology or anthropology or what have you. What it presupposes is a combination of these things that you actually look at when you look at public policy. All right? So let me sort of emphasize a couple of other things here before I stop. One, again, emphasized both by the two speakers before me. A certain combination of theory and practice, okay? When you're trying, theory is not something abstract, all right? Theory is about what you learn on the ground and you abstract it from there and have certain formulations about what you think represents the functioning of a particular society, a state, a public policy, et cetera, et cetera. That's what, in some ways, theory essentially means. Now, we focus a lot on that. But again, we also have a crucial fieldwork component, okay? All the 4 semesters that you hear in summer as well as in winter breaks, you will be engaged on the ground doing internships, doing certain kinds of research work on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a, there is a very symbiotic, organic relationship between what you theoretically learn and what's going to be, whatever your research or fieldwork project in some ways is going to be all about, all right? One final thing I wanted to emphasize, which I thought perhaps wasn't emphasized enough by Nilotpal and Rajeshri. I don't know what your backgrounds are. Let me just ask this question. How many of you are from social sciences? Just raise your hands. How many of you are from humanities, English literature? So, okay, so you, engineering or sciences? What about others? I see not, did I miss anything? Natural sciences. All right. In a certain sense, and let me just emphasize this, the education here is very, very different. All right? And I mean that in a very particular way. All right? It is just intensely rigorous. All right? I have been through, as an undergrad and as a master's student, through colleges and universities in India. And I went to one of the really better ones. I was in Delhi University. But we study in a very particular way, right? I did political science as an undergrad, as a master's student. Study there meant that, or actually doing well, meant something very particular. 3 weeks before the exams, you collect the last 10 years question papers. You get ready with 4 or 5 or 6. And at the very least, you get about 3 or 4. And the last one you can, in any case, crack, right? That's the mode of education that we are used to. That's pedagogical sort of, orientation that we have. And I cracked that system. I did very well, But what that basically meant was that throughout the entire year, you're missing classes. You're hanging out in cafeteria. In fact, used to hang out with the professors as well. It's, they're all together in the entire, scheme of things there. That's not going to happen here. You don't miss classes. You absolutely have to read throughout the entire year. I really want you to be prepared for it. Do know that if you're not working throughout the entire week, for extended periods of time, this in some ways is not the place for you. If you think it's any other kind of institution. So in some ways, what I've realized, generally speaking, is that engineering students usually are well placed with that kind of, rigor, which is to say, regimen, because they have to go through this continual assessment things, et cetera, and they have no way of escaping that, right? Whereas, I, as an art student, et cetera, escaped that entire regimen as an undergrad student, as a graduate student, and so forth. So that's not going to happen. And one of the crucial things is, you might be surprised by that, it doesn't happen in India. You actually will have to read the text before you come to the class. That's usually a novelty. It doesn't happen. So far as I know, it doesn't happen anywhere in India. I didn't, okay? I think, that was 15, 20 years back, but I think it's pretty much the same even now in some of these institutions. So in other words, what I'm basically wanting to emphasize in a certain sense is, you really will have to be prepared, or once you hear, we will ensure that you get prepared for it. Anything else I should add, or perhaps things will come up in question answer session? What I missed out in some ways is on what happens to our, MPG students, what happens when they go out. But it's pretty much along the lines what Nilotpal spoke of, what Rajeshri spoke of. We send students off to consultancies, to NGOs. We also, have students who have ended up, being interested in doing research and PhD, going out and doing their PhDs abroad, et cetera, et cetera. But we can sort of take that up once we are done.
Thank you, Vishnupad.